The first signs of darkness came in the night. Little Alma's scream pierced the quiet house, bringing her parents running to her bedroom. She sat trembling in her bed, tears streaming down her face, her small body shaking with terror. "She wants to take me away," Alma cried, clinging to her mother Ekin. Her words carried a certainty that went beyond ordinary childhood fears. Something in her voice made the air in the room feel heavier, colder. Ekin did what most mothers would do. She smiled, smoothed her daughter's hair, and promised everything would be fine. She stayed with Alma, holding her close until the child's breathing steadied and she drifted back to sleep. Like most adults, Ekin saw only a nightmare, nothing more. But morning brought a troubling sign. Angry red scratch marks lined Alma's arms, too deep to be from her own nails. When Alma insisted the woman from her dream had done it, Ekin simply trimmed her daughter's nails and got her ready for school. She couldn't know then that by dismissing her daughter's fears, she was opening the door to something dark and hungry. This was the first warning, written in the language of nightmares and scratches. But adults rarely speak the language of such warnings. They see what they expect to see. A child's bad dream, nothing more. In their world of rational explanations, they forgot an ancient truth. Sometimes the monsters children fear are real, and sometimes the greatest danger lies in not listening when a child tries to tell us about them. In the warm light of morning, with the sun streaming through Alma's window, it was easy to forget the night's terrors. But in the shadows that pooled in the corners of the room, something waited. Something that had tasted Alma's fear and found it sweet. Something that was already weaving a web of deception that would test not just a child's courage, but a family's very foundation. The church stood peaceful that Wednesday evening, its hall still warm from prayers and worship. As Ekin and her husband Hannah walked to their car, they spotted a figure that would change their lives, a pregnant woman weeping in the shadows, ignored by the passing crowd as if she were invisible. Something about the woman's isolation tugged at Ekin's heart. Perhaps it was the way she cradled her swollen belly, or how her shoulders shook with each sob. But more likely, it was because in the stranger's tears, Ekin saw reflections of her own past pain. The woman called herself Ginika. Her story spilled out like water from a broken dam. A dead husband, cruel in-laws who blamed her for his death, a baby soon to come, and nowhere to call home. She spoke of sleeping in an unfinished building, her voice trembling with just the right amount of fear and hope. Each word seemed carefully chosen to pierce Ekin's heart. "It's just like what happened to my mother," Ekin whispered to Hannah. The memories flooded back. Years of watching her mother struggle after father's death, their own family turning against them, the bitter taste of selling things on the street to survive. In Ginika's story, Ekin heard echoes of her own childhood trauma. What Ekin and Hannah couldn't see was the careful calculation behind Ginika's tears. They didn't notice how her eyes studied their reactions, how she adjusted her tale to match the sympathy in their faces. Like master fishermen choose the perfect bait, Ginika had selected her story with deadly precision. "We have a small guest house," Ekin found herself saying, her husband nodding in agreement. "You could stay there until the baby comes." The words came easily, naturally, wrapped in the warmth of genuine compassion. How could they know they were inviting a serpent into their garden? And so evil entered their lives dressed in the clothes of charity. It came not with thunderbolts or omens, but with grateful smiles and quiet tears. It came through the very door that made them human, their capacity for kindness, their inability to walk past another's pain. Back home, only Amma saw the truth. When she first laid eyes on Ginika, she froze, her small face draining of color. "That's her," she whispered, tugging at her mother's dress. "The woman from my dream." But adults rarely heed children's warnings, especially when their hearts are full of compassion and their minds convinced of their own wisdom. In the days to come, they would learn the high price of ignored warnings. But for now, they helped Ginika settle into their guest house, proud of their good deed, blind to the darkness they had welcomed into their home. Night after night, terror crept closer to Amma's world. What started in dreams now walked the halls of her home, wearing Ginika's gentle smile like a mask. Each encounter brought new horrors, each darkness deeper than the last. It began with the monkey, not a normal monkey, This one had eyes that glowed red in the darkness under Amma's bed, its presence defying all logic and reason. When she screamed for her parents, they came running as parents do, searching beneath the bed with flashlights and reassuring words. They found nothing, of course. Evil knows when to hide. But the next morning, Ginika's words froze Amma's blood. How did you like the monkey? The question hung in the air like poison, wrapped in a smile that didn't quite reach Ginika's eyes. In that moment, Amma knew with terrible certainty that her nightmare had followed her into the waking world. Later came the moment that shattered any doubt. Unable to sleep, Amma had gone to apologize to Ginika, trying so hard to be the good girl her parents wanted her to be. Instead, she found something impossible. Ginika sleeping with her legs suspended in the air, her supposedly pregnant belly now flat as a board. The witch's true nature revealed itself in that unguarded moment. But who would believe a child's tale of floating legs and vanishing pregnancies? Stop telling lies about Ginika, her mother would say, each dismissal driving a wedge between them. But they weren't lies. The shadows in Amma's room now had voices, whispering her name in the darkness. Cold hands touched her legs in the night. The evil that had first visited her dreams now walked freely through her home, growing bolder with each passing day. The worst part wasn't the terror itself. It was the loneliness of facing it alone. Every time Amma tried to warn her parents, their dismissal pushed her further into isolation. Akine's anger at her daughter's lies built a wall between them, brick by brick, exactly as Ginika had planned. In the space between what adults could see and what a child knew to be true, Amma fought her battle alone. Her home, once a sanctuary, became a battlefield where shadows danced and monsters wore human faces. Her parents, meant to be her protectors, had become unwitting allies to the very evil that threatened their daughter. And through it all, Ginika watched and waited, her false kindness wrapping around the family like a spider's web. The trap was set, the bonds of family trust strategically weakened. All that remained was the final strike, the moment when nightmare and reality would merge completely, and Amma's worst fears would come terrifyingly true. The price of ignorance. When evil strikes on that fateful night, darkness claimed its prize. Ahina found his daughter standing in the shadows of her room, but it wasn't really Amma anymore. Strange words poured from her mouth in a voice that wasn't her own, her small body rigid as a statue. When he tried to reach her, to break whatever spell held her, she collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. She's cold, Ikine whispered, cradling her daughter's lifeless body. The warmth that made Amma who she was, her laughter, her spirit, her light, had been stolen, leaving only an empty shell behind. In that moment, every warning they had ignored came rushing back with the force of a tidal wave. They ran to confront Ginika, their feet pounding against the garden path to the guest house. But they were too late. The room they found bore no resemblance to the neat space they had offered the pregnant widow. Blood stained the walls in strange patterns. Mysterious symbols covered every surface. The stench of evil hung thick in the air, making their eyes water. Most telling of all, Ginika was gone, leaving behind only the evidence of her true nature. Now they understood with terrible clarity. Every piece of the puzzle fell into place. The manufactured story that had played on Akine's sympathies, the false pregnancy that made her seem vulnerable, the careful manipulation that turned them against their own child. Ginika had never been a victim. She had been a predator, and they had invited her into their home. Their desperate rush to save Amma became a nightmare of its own. The car that wouldn't start, the empty streets where no one would help them. And then, the final cruel twist. Masked men appearing from nowhere, snatching Amma's body at gunpoint, disappearing into the night with their precious child. Standing in the empty street, Ikine and Ahina faced the full weight of their failure. They had been the gatekeepers of their home, their daughter's protectors, and they had failed on every level. Their pride, their certainty that they knew better than their child, their eagerness to show kindness without wisdom, all of it had led to this moment. What they didn't yet understand was that this was exactly what Ginika had planned. Even now, her dark magic was working, preparing to drive wedges between them when they needed unity most. The price of their ignorance was steep, but they had not yet paid it in full. The real test, and their last chance to save their daughter was only beginning. As parents, they had ignored evil when it smiled at them. As protectors, they had failed to guard their most precious treasure. Now, as warriors in a battle they never trained for, they would have to find strength they didn't know they had. Because somewhere in the darkness, Amma's spirit hung between two worlds, waiting for her parents to finally understand what she had known all along. The test. A family divided in the darkest hour of their lives. Ekin and Hannah found themselves not just fighting evil, but fighting each other. This was Ginika's true mastery, not just in stealing their child, but in poisoning the love that might have saved her. Their desperate search led them through shadows to a man who promised help, but in his failed attempt to challenge the witch, they witnessed her terrible power as she transformed him into a monkey with a laugh that chilled their souls. It was a display meant to break their spirit, to show them how helpless they truly were. It's your fault. Hannah's words cut through the night air like a knife. If you hadn't invited her home, the blame game had begun, exactly as Ginika had planned. Every parent's worst nightmare, a missing child, became the wedge that drove them apart when they needed each other most. They stood at a crossroads in the strange land where their search had led them. Pride, that silent killer of love, made them choose different paths. Ekin turned right, Hannah left, each convinced they knew better than the other. The darkness between them grew with every step they took in opposite directions. Ekin found her way back to their empty home, where every toy, every photograph of Amma seemed to accuse her of failure. Hannah wandered lost in the forest, where an old man appeared with wisdom he was almost too angry to hear. Only together can you defeat this evil. The night grew colder, darker, longer. Their daughter's life hung in the balance while they nursed their wounded pride. This was the true test, not of their power against the witch's magic, but of their ability to overcome their own human weakness. In their separation, they had given Ginika exactly what she wanted. Evil thrives in division, grows stronger in the space between hearts that should beat as one. Every minute they spent apart was another minute their daughter slipped further away, another victory for the darkness that had torn their family apart. This was the crossroads where many families break, where blame becomes bitterness, where pride becomes permanent division, where love loses to fear and anger. Ekin and Hannah stood on this precipice, their daughter's life and their family's future hanging by a thread that grew thinner with each passing moment. But even in this darkness, a light waited to guide them, if only they could humble themselves enough to see it. Because sometimes the path to victory requires first admitting defeat. Sometimes saving those we love means first saving ourselves from our own pride. The path to victory. Unity conquers all in the depths of night. While grief and regret filled their empty home, Alma's spirit found her mother. A gentle touch, soft as moonlight, carried a message of hope. Their daughter wasn't gone, not yet. In that moment of grace, Ekin understood what pride had nearly cost them, and what love might still save. The pastor's wisdom cut through their darkness like a blade of light. The witch separated you because she fears your unity. Simple words that carried the weight of truth. Every argument, every bitter word between them had been another link in the chains binding their daughter to darkness. Ekin found Hannah with the help of prayer and providence. Their reunion awkward but necessary. Standing before each other in the strange forest, they saw their own fear and pride reflected in each other's eyes. No words were needed. Their shared love for Amma spoke louder than any apology. Together they faced the witch's lair, a simple hut that radiated evil. The pastor stood with them, his faith strengthening theirs, but the real power lay in their joined hands. Years of marriage, of shared dreams, of raising their daughter together. All of it flowed between them like electricity. When the witch appeared, her fury shook the forest. But this time, they stood unmoved. Each spell she cast, each curse she hurled, shattered against the shield of their united love. Her power, built on division and fear, couldn't penetrate the bond between two hearts beating as one. Call your daughter, the pastor commanded. Their voices rose together, not in fear, but in certainty. They called for Amma not as desperate parents, but as guardians of light against darkness. Their unified prayer grew stronger with each word, drowning out the witch's incantations. Inside her magical prison, Amma felt her parents' love reaching for her like a lifeline. The enchanted box that held her spirit couldn't withstand the power of three hearts beating in perfect harmony. As the witch's power crumbled, consumed by its own darkness, Amma's spirit soared free, finding its way back to her waiting body. Mother, father, her first words, though weak, carried the strength of mountains. They held their daughter, feeling her warmth return, knowing that this embrace was a second chance. A chance to listen better, to trust more deeply, to guard their unity as their most precious possession. In the end, it wasn't magic that saved them, but the oldest power in the world, the love of parents for their child, made stronger by humility and unity. They had learned, at terrible cost, that real strength lies not in being right, but in standing together. That in the face of darkness, a family united shines with unquenchable light. The witch's evil had tested them, nearly broken them, but ultimately made them stronger. In their home once again, they held each other close, understanding now that every challenge, every darkness, every fear could be faced, as long as they faced it together. For in this victory lay a truth as old as time. Evil may be strong, but it can never match the power of a family bound by love, strengthened by faith, and made wise by trials overcome together.